If you're a physio, chiro, or another type of health pro that struggles to convert initial consultations into paying patients, I'm going to show you the exact top-down script that will help you convert 90% of your patients without being pushy or scammy. I'm also going to show you why it works so you can adapt your own one in the future. And by the way, my name's Phil. I'm a health business architect and communications coach, and I've been selling health products and services for the last 10 years. My clients average 150 to 200K a year as health professionals, and I want to help you do the same. Now, this script I'm going to show you is called the authority script. And this is best suited for practitioners who want to display their authority and take charge, but also want to be careful not to scare away the patient because they're being too direct. It also works for practitioners who want to pitch the best possible plan first, followed by lower tier options. Now, you want to do this after you've provided an immediate win during the session, so you've got buy-in for your abilities. You've already outlined what the rehab pathway looks like and the duration it might take, and now you're talking about the frequency of the visits. So let's dive into the script. Okay, Phil, the entire rehab pathway is going to take anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks, and the best way for us to shorten that time frame is by following the rehab instructions closely and by coming in a few more times than standard recovery so we can push your rehab. How does that sound to you? Now here, the patient will usually say yes, and then we enter the script. Okay, let me start off with the best result plan first, and I'll show you what that looks like. If you think it fits, we'll go with that one, but if it doesn't, I'll show you the next best until we find something that fits. Is that okay? Again, the patient will say yes, so we continue. Okay, the best results we get for this type of injury lies in the first 4 to 6 weeks, where our patients would come to see us for a minimum twice a week, and once we get through that initial period of healing, it's once a week until they're ready for discharge if all things go smoothly. The reason we do this is because the first 6 weeks is when the injury is most vulnerable, so if we don't do the right things, it might make the next 6 weeks even harder to progress. The main downside to this is it does require a bit more time commitment from our patients, and if they're on a budget, it might not be realistic. That's the best result option. How does that sound? Now, if the patient says, okay, let's just do that, then just book them in twice a week for the next 6 weeks. But if they say, okay, but what's after that? You say, the next best plan we have is twice a week for the first fortnight, followed by once a week until you're ready for discharge if all things go smoothly. Like the previous plan, it's just the most sensitive period of your injury, so we like to monitor and progress it carefully before you become more independent from week 3 onwards. Most patients prefer this plan if they're just looking for steady rehab and aren't in an urgent rush to recover. There's really no downside to this. You've just got to be prepared for at least 12 weeks of rehab. How does that sound? Now, most patients will say yes, and if they don't, you just move on to your last option. Okay, the last option, and we don't recommend doing any less than this because things go wrong more than they go right, is once a week for the entire 12 weeks. Now, this option requires a lot of exercise history and confidence from the patient because they'll be doing a lot of rehab on their own. The main downside is if you don't have the history or the confidence, most people do have a delayed recovery or don't recover at all during this time period. What do you think? Now, most patients will either pick the last option or they revert back to option number 2. Now, if they do want an even lower option, you could go lower, but it's unlikely they're going to commit to the full term of care anyway, so I think you're better off just telling them it's not going to work. Okay, so that's the script. You can use that right away, or if you want to understand why it's powerful, then keep watching because I'm going to explain to you step by step, word for word, exactly what I'm doing. Okay, so let's start from the top. Okay, Phil, the entire rehab pathway is going to take anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks. Now, the reason we say this first is because this sets expectations. So, I'm not telling the patient that it's going to be a quick fix. I'm telling them right away it's going to take 10 to 12 weeks. So when I do pitch them the frequency, they're like, oh, well, it's a long-term care plan, so I didn't expect it to be so short anyway. And the best way for us to shorten that time frame is by following rehab instructions closely and by coming in a few more times in standard recovery so we can push your rehab. Now, the reason we say this is because by saying following rehab instructions closely, this is to demonstrate our authority, but then I also say coming in a few more times more than standard recovery so we can push your rehab. This is clinically actually sound. This is a clinical justification for why we pitch a longer care plan. Now, the clinical justification is this. If we look at this statement from a physiological point of view, there are patients who are fit, they're healthy, or maybe they're super fit and healthy, where they will have a 48-hour window where they will recover and adapt to the rehab, where you can actually push them a bit further along. So for some people, they recover so well that within 1 week, they will have the same recovery as somebody who is 2 weeks in because the histories are just different. And so when I say a few more times than standard, we are telling these people, if you are wanting to go quicker, if you recover in time, by coming in earlier, I can progress you quicker, you will adapt quicker, and you might be able to shave some time off the full course of rehab. Okay, so that's the clinical justification. Okay, and then at the end I say, how does that sound to you? And the reason we use this is because we want to ask a permissive question. And so what that does is it increases the amount of buy-in, but also perception of control. So most people, I've always said, prefer to be buying, not sold. So by saying, how does that sound to you? We prime them to say, yes, it's my choice to listen more. So let's begin. Okay, the next part is, okay, so let me start off with the best result plan first, and I'll show you what that looks like. And if you think it fits, we'll go with that one. Okay, so what am I doing over here? So let me start off with the best result plan first. Okay, so this is called a qualifying statement. So I'm telling you, I'm gonna start off with the best first. So when I do pitch it, because it's gonna be a premium higher plan, they're like, oh, well, that's the best. He's already told me. I don't need to be scared or afraid that he's going to give me something that's beyond what I need. It's already the best. Then I say, I'll show you what that looks like. And if you think it fits, we'll go with that one. So I'm gonna show you what it looks like. If you think it fits, again, I'm giving them a sense of control. This is a sense of control. We'll go with that one. But if it doesn't, I'll show you the next best until we find something that fits. Is that okay? Something that fits. This is a disarm. Because we know they're gonna think, well, what if I don't want the best? What if I want something a bit less? Maybe I want something even better. So I say if it doesn't, I make them aware that I'm aware this might not be the best fit. And then I'm also gonna keep going until we find something that fits. So there is literally no reason why they will not leave this consultation without a plan, because we're gonna find something that fits you and we just keep downgrading until we do. Next. Okay, the best results we get for this type of injury lies in the first 4 to 6 weeks, where our patients will come to see us a minimum twice a week. And once we get through that initial period of healing, it's once a week until they're ready for discharge if all things go smoothly. Okay, so let's look at what's happening here. Okay, the best results, this is another qualifier, right? So this is the best we got for this type of injury lies in the first 4 to 6 weeks. This is expectations, okay? They're not being undersold. Where our patients would come to see us for a minimum twice a week, that's an anchor. So now they're like, oh, so the best is twice a week. So we call this an anchor. And once we get through that initial period of healing, it's once a week until they're ready for discharge. And this once a week is really important because this part here is another disarm. Because genuinely, if they get through the first 6 weeks at twice a week, I'm pretty certain they're only gonna need you once a week ongoing. So that also makes them think, well, I'm not coming twice a week for 12 weeks. I'm coming twice a week for the first 6 weeks, followed by once a week the next 6 weeks. Next, the reason we do this is because the first 6 weeks is when the injury is most vulnerable. So if we don't do the right things, it makes the next 6 weeks harder to progress. When I say the reason we do this is a justification. Okay, so we're not just gonna throw things out there, we're actually giving them a rationale so they understand what's happening. And this is also true, clinical truth, right? In the first 6 weeks, the initial period of healing, immobilization, inflammation, we wanna set the best foundation there so they can progress later. And the same thing with this statement, this statement over here. Now, the next thing is, the main downside to this is it does require a bit more time commitment from our patients, and if they're on a budget, it might not be realistic. So what's happening here? The main downside, so I'm actually doing pro-con selling like I told you guys in another video, but the downside, this is what we use to neutralize the sell. So what I mean by neutralize the sell is it makes you come across as a neutral party, because I'm not saying it's amazing, I'm saying, look, this is why it's good, but also this is why it could potentially be bad. And so neutralizing is really important to remove yourself from the actual sale itself, and it builds trust with the patient. And then I say it does require a bit more time commitment from our patients, which is true, right? Nothing builds trust more than the truth. And if they're on a budget, it might not be realistic. With this has got a pre-handle where if they're already thinking about, oh, this might be a little bit too expensive, I've said, you know what? If it's not for you, it's not for you financially. Now, I finish off by saying that's the best result option. How does that sound? Okay, so again, I've said that's the best result I can give you. That's the highest premium option. How does that sound? If they say no, okay, let's move down. If they say, no, let's just go with that, then you can go ahead and book them in. But the most important thing is you have qualified that I'm giving you the best right away. So you're not gonna feel like you're lying to them and trying to upsell them something big because you've already told them that's what I'm doing. Now let's see what happens next. Okay, so let's just say the patient says, no, give me the next one. Then you say the next best plan we have is twice a week for the first fortnight, followed by once a week until you're ready for discharge if all things go smoothly. So it's the same thing as before. It's twice a week for the first fortnight. So I'm still being very, very clear with the time frame. And then it's once a week until you're ready for discharge. Like the previous plan, it's just the most sensitive period for your injury, so we like to monitor and progress it carefully before you become more independent from week 3 onwards. So from here, same thing as before, I'm using a clinical justification, and also I'm giving them a disarm because I'm telling them you're expected to be on your own by week 3, so they know, oh, this plan is going to require less of me. Most patients prefer this plan if they're just looking for steady rehab and aren't in a rush to recover. So from over here, this is very tactical. I say most patients because this is like a third-party statement. And so what I mean by a third-party statement is when you say most patients, instead of saying you might prefer this plan, you're showing them that there are a lot of people who already use this, as opposed to me saying you prefer this plan because you're on a budget. I'll say most patients prefer this plan because they're on a budget. So I don't make it about them, I make it about what people like them are doing, and usually it becomes a less personal, and it also feels like I'm not selling them directly, I'm just showing them what people are buying. And then over here, steady rehab, what I'm doing here is I'm labeling, right? So most people, if they don't want the most extreme or best case, then they're just looking for something steady. I'm not gonna wait for them to say it, I'm gonna say it for them so they feel like I'm describing the plan that they want. And they aren't in an urgent rush to recover, so this qualifies people who are not looking for the super urgency, like athletes or people who need to go travel. These people are just like, I'm good with a normal type of rehab, I don't need the best. And then at the end I say, there's really no downside to this, you've just got to be prepared for 12 weeks of rehab. How's that sound? So here I'm neutralizing again, but this time I'm not really mentioning the cost because I really don't think it's that expensive for most people, and you've just got to be prepared for 12 weeks of rehab, which is setting expectations. And then at the end, I always finish with a question to see where their head's at. Okay, so let's just say they say no again. All right, let's go down to the last one. Okay, the last option, and we don't recommend doing any less than this because things go wrong more than they go right, is once a week for the entire 12 weeks. Okay, so the last option, I say this as the last option because it's definitive, right? So people are like, okay, this is the last one I'm gonna listen to. And we don't recommend doing any less than this. Okay, this sets the frame of quality. Okay, so you're being authoritative with your quality because things go wrong more than they go right. That's educating people on the risk. And then once a week for the entire 12 weeks, this is just time frame and expectations. Okay? So if we look at this statement, I'm being definitive. This is the last one. We don't recommend doing any less than this. And people who do this, sometimes it doesn't go right either. So this option requires a lot of exercise history and confidence from the patient because they'll be doing a lot of rehab on their own. So this statement's really important because these two parts, exercise history and confidence, this has got a self-label. And what I mean by that is, as you're describing this, your patient will be like, well, do I have exercise history? And well, do I have the confidence? And if they don't, they'll automatically deselect themselves from this option because they don't have that. And over here, they'll be doing a lot of rehab on their own, which is independent expectations. So I'm telling you right away, you're going to be expected to do a lot on your own with once a week. So if somebody chooses this option, they are aware that you are not going to be doing a lot of hands-on and time on them because they have to do a lot of rehab on their own. Now the main downside is if you don't have the history or confidence, most people do have a delayed recovery or don't recover at all during the time period. And over here, all of this is just risk education. Okay, and it has to be true because if it is your first injury and you don't have an exercise history and you don't have the confidence in your ability to do exercise, then it's highly unlikely with once a week of treatment and coaching, you are going to get better. And so that's just me being truthful. And the thing about being truthful about a risk is it usually makes people understand it and pick it more, or they'll either go back to program 2 or program 1 because they realize, oh, this is actually better suited for me. Okay, and so I ask, what do you think? And look, at this point, if you ask, what do you think? You throw it back to them, they also say, no, it doesn't work for me, then nothing you give them is probably going to work because either you've done a bad job during the consult, you haven't given them the win, or they just don't intend to want to book in at any point to get their rehab better. So that's the entire breakdown of the script. And there you have it. You have a top-down authoritative script where you'll always start off with the best recommendation and move down depending on what your patient wants. As you can see, the patient really has no reason to say no as long as you're being genuine with your recommendations. Now take that, use it, let me know in the comments or DMs when it works, and I'll see you next time. Ciao.